Game 8 of the World Chess Championship has just finished. Magnus had white, Jan had black. Let's see what happened. So Magnus kicked off with pawn to e4, we had e5, knight f3, and Jan repeats with knight f6, going in for the Petrov defence. And Magnus now deviates from game 4 by going pawn to d4 here. He previously captured on e5. So after this move, Jan took on e4, we had bishop to d3, pawn to d5 now, and Magnus jumps in and takes this pawn on e5. And here Jan plays knight to d7, immediately challenging in the centre, and Magnus chops this knight and the bishop recaptures. And now Magnus plays a nuance here. So the most common way to play here is with castles, but then you give black extra options here. So black can now go bishop to d6, and if Magnus goes knight to d2, which is what he played in the game before castles, well, now black can actually castle and isn't obliged to take that knight, because if Magnus takes here and after pawn recaptures takes twice, now you're running into a tactic with bishop takes on h2, and after king takes, queen h4 check, king back, and you pick up the bishop. So that's why Magnus played the move order slightly differently here. Instead of castling, he first played knight to d2, and this gives Jan slightly less options, so he chops that knight here. We had bishop recaptures, and now bishop to d6. Magnus now castles, and here's a move that took everyone by surprise. Pawn to h5. So you might think, well, why didn't he just castle here? I mean, the slight challenge here, and this is the beauty of white having the first move, is that white now gets queen to h5 in. So the position is completely symmetrical, but white achieves this first. You're hitting this pawn and threatening checkmate. So you can't go g6, or you drop here. So you're forced to go f5, which is quite a concession really. It's, quite a weakening move. So that's why Jan was looking for something different, and he actually lashed out with pawn to h5 here. Not necessarily such a bad move by itself, but things do begin to go slightly awry now. Now the most obvious way of playing here is with rook to e1, giving that check, developing the rook. You can also consider going c4 here as white to begin undermining the centre, another very common and standard plan. But Magnus had a long think here for 40 minutes and actually came up with queen e1. This is by no means the best move in the position, but he said his brain was just completely fried following such a long couple of days of chess, especially in that marathon 128 move game. So after queen to e1, in a way he's kind of offering a draw really. If Jan goes queen to e7, the queens come off, king comes up here. This is very quickly heading towards a draw, but he actually played king to f8. He said he didn't see too much difference between these ways of playing, but he now has some uncomfortable pressure to deal with from white. So Magnus now gets in this bishop to b4 move, and black can't take here, or after the queen recaptures, it will be check and attacking this pawn on b7. So instead Jan plays queen to e7, and again this is quite strange. He's now decided to play queen e7 after compromising his king, so he didn't seem fully at the races today, Jan, it has to be said. Magnus swaps those bishops now, queen recaptures and queen into d2 here. We had rook to e8 from Jan coming to this e-file, and if his rooks were connected he'd be fine probably, but because they're not, after rook a to e1, the only way Jan can see to contest for the e-file is by playing rook to h6 here. Quite an artificial way to try and bring the rook across to e6, and he never quite finds the time, because after queen to g5, there's now pressure against both of these pawns, which aren't supported by another pawn in a chain. So we had c6 from Jan protecting this one, and this is the thing, he'd like to play rook to e6 here and challenge that e-file, but then after the exchange he drops on h5, and so he's just not quite in time. He also wants to play maybe queen to f6 and offer a queen trade, but then d5 drops. So that's why he goes c6, but now Magnus has the chance to chop here. The bishop recaptures, rook to e1, and now queen to f6 trying to trade, but Magnus doesn't have to go in for this. He actually drops the queen back onto the e-file. We have bishop to d7, repositioning that bishop, and now a nice time out, pawn to h3, just giving the king an escape square in some of these variations and still maintaining a nagging edge here. So pawn to h4 from Jan, and now pawn to c4 from Magnus. He starts to break down this centre here, and Jan feels obliged to take here. bishop recaptures, and none of this is overly bad in and of itself, but it's just a bit hard for Jan to unravel his pieces here, as we can see. And that uncomfortable pressure now actually leads him to make a big blunder, so he lashes out with pawn to b5, but this is just not a good move. It really weakens the structure here and runs into an instant tactic of queen a3, check, king moves away, and queen chops on a7. And the problem is the d7 bishop's hanging, so you haven't got time to take here. So probably the best for Jan's try here would have been bishop takes on h3, and then we could have seen a variation like this. So queen takes on f7, queen recaptures, and now a nice intermezzo before recapturing the queen, rook e8 check. Queen can't take because it's pinned, so the king would have to jump away, and then you recapture. Let's say the bishop drops back to f5 because it's hanging, and maybe we'd have something like rook e5 here. So Magnus is a pawn up, but it takes some converting, of course. And this would have been the best try, I think. Instead of all this, after this move, queen takes on a7, Jan went in for queen d8 here, just passively defending the bishop. And this is almost as good as a resignation. I mean, Magnus now just does what he wants. He drops the bishop back. We had rook to d6 now, attacking that pawn in the middle. Rook to e4, swinging it up the board. Bishop into e6 now, and that move was basically forced because of the pressure on f7 and the power of the rook maybe swinging to f4 as well. So these bishops now get traded off. The rook recaptures, Magnus takes back, pawn recaptures, and now queen to c5, just re-centralising the queen. We had queen to a5 now from Jan, seeking some desperate counterplay, which you have to do in such positions. You can't just tie yourself down to defending these pawns. Magnus now takes on c6. We had queen e1 check, king h2, queen takes on f2, and now queen takes on e6 check. The king sidesteps, queen e4 check, re-centralising that queen, king g8, and now pawn to b3. So Magnus knows he's losing this one, but we'll see now that after the black queen takes that pawn, Magnus checks on e8, the king steps away, and he picks up on b5. So he's two clean pawns up here. The game is completely gone. Jan's only chance is a perpetual, but Magnus plays this part of the game really professionally now. So the queen drops into f2, threatening this kind of thing as a perpetual, but Magnus now plays queen to e5, bringing that queen over to the dark squares. We had queen to b2 here, hitting this pawn, queen e4 check, king g8, queen d3, and now he protects both of these pawns. So Jan swings back over to threaten a perpetual again, but we had queen to c3, protecting these dark squares here, queen f4 check, king g1, king h7 from Jan, queen to d3 check, pawn to g6 now, queen to d1 now from Magnus. So everything is covered, including the back rank, and there's really nothing for Jan to be doing here. He checks again, the king sidesteps, and now he desperately throws this g-pawn in a last-ditch effort, but Magnus calmly goes d5 now. He's worked out that after g4, he can recapture there, and h3 just runs into queen to f3 here, and there's nothing to be done in this position. It's completely lost, and Jan actually chucked in the towel here. So unfortunately, Jan just couldn't get out of the blocks today. He ran into a dodgy opening position, and he really looked fatigued in the way he was playing. So hopefully he can get some good rest now and then come back fighting hard in the next game. If you enjoyed this video and don't want to miss the next, then click here to subscribe, and to watch more epic chess videos, click here. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.